A good evening and a warm welcome to all of you attending today's webinar. Before we begin in earnest, I'd like to make a few housekeeping announcements regarding the Zoom tools. I would request that all of you use the chat option to stick to discussions and to tell us if either our audio is not good enough or you're unable to see slide changes or one of the following. Please use the Q&A tab to ask us any questions. We will be taking all questions at the end of the webinar, so we will not be stopping in the middle to attend to the questions tab. So please do not feel aggrieved if we haven't covered your question just as yet. Please do not use the raise hand option for questions and stick solely to the Q&A tab. And now that we are done with those announcements, I'd like to welcome you again to our webinar on household finance in India, approaches and challenges, where we will be presenting and discussing our recently published paper of the same name. I would like to take this time to do some introductions while our cameras are still on. My name is Vishwanath, and I'm here with my colleagues Monami and Misha. Would you like to introduce yourself, guys?
Sure, Vishwanath. Hello, everyone. My name is Monami Dasgupta, and I work at the Household Finance Research Initiative at Dwara Research.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. This is Misha. I work as Research Manager with the Household Finance Practice. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we dive into the meat of the presentation, we'll all be turning off our cameras, and I'd like to briefly describe Dwara Research and the work we do in the Household Finance Research Initiative. Dwara Research is a policy research institution based here in Chennai. Our mission here is to ensure that every individual and every enterprise has complete access to financial services. And Dwara Research, Household Finance Research Initiative, to which all three of us belong, aims to rigorously understand the financial choices and decisions of low-income or excluded individuals and households and their relation to achieving households' objectives. We believe that careful research and a comprehensive body of evidence can powerfully inform market practices and the design of financial sector policy in order to deliver comprehensive financial services for all individuals, households, as well as enterprises. We hope that this will eventually serve to create a safe environment in which formerly excluded populations may fully experience the benefits of financial inclusion. So today's talk will run through 5 main areas. We will discuss our motivation for writing this paper. We will give you a brief introduction to household finance research. We will talk about what we think are the 2 themes of household finance research. We will then move on to discuss what the state of household finance in India is at the moment. And then we will conclude with discussing what are the priorities for innovation in financial services for low-income households. So our motivations for writing this paper were to help provide and discuss a theoretical background and research areas of the discipline of household finance research. We feel that this paper would best serve those researchers and academicians currently looking at the various areas of household finance in India. So to introduce household finance here, the origins for the term household finance exist in a speech given by John Campbell as a part of his presidential address to the American Finance Association in 2006. A more formal definition exists courtesy of Peter Tufano, where he calls it the study of how institutions provide goods and services to satisfy the financial functions of the household, how consumers make financial decisions, and how government action affects the provision of financial services. There is no small amount of household finance research in the world these days, but this tends to largely be focused in more advanced economies. The motivation to conduct household finance research in India as an instance of a developing country arise from, firstly, the existence of large gaps in the access to and usage of financial services by households, household asset allocations being divergent from what would be expected through normative economic theory, meaning conventionally held ideas may not apply in these situations. The financial services that do exist being largely credit-based and non-credit alternatives being scarce in the ecosystem. Lastly, there being heterogeneity amongst households, meaning that supply-side decision-making cannot be generic and must take into account these differences. These motivations exist at a national level, but the effects and consequences are most strongly felt by those households that tend to fall into lower income brackets. To understand why this is true, we need to look at some of the facets of these low-income households. These households keep a very small portion of their asset portfolios in financial assets. In addition to this, the human capital held by the members of the household is often the principal asset, and it forms the most valuable component of household portfolios. Low-income households here face greater risks and uncertainties than those with higher incomes, and they cope with these through mechanisms that are not often formalized and sometimes are not very well understood. This finds its way into their lives through informal lending, among others, and in the presence of a wide variety, and despite there being a wide variety of formal providers, which can help integrate them to the financial system, there are persistent debt cycles with households essentially borrowing to repay. We will be looking at these in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation. To look at all household finance research in India currently, as well as possible avenues of research going forward, we employ two themes. The first of these is the what and the who theme. The what aspect of this theme refers to the closer understanding of what exactly is it that households do. This looks at behaviors, strategies, and choices. So the who aspect refers to the stakeholders in the financial systems in India. So namely, these are the households, which are the decision makers and beneficiaries, and the financial providers. And then it also looks at the interactions between these two stakeholders. Through this theme, the scope for research is to understand the present situation. That is, what is the extent of financial planning? How are households connected to the system at the extensive, which is access, and intensive, which is usage, margins? And what are their behaviors with regards to specific financial tools? The research methodologies involved in collecting the information towards understanding households and their interactions involve collecting highly granular and high quality data, which ideally would be collected across time. So these usually involve surveys executed either at a more focused level, a more focused region level, or at a countrywide level. So examples of countrywide surveys conducted for these purposes are the NSSO surveys, those surveys conducted by NABARD and CRISIL, and even private players, such as those conducted by IHDS and the CMIE group. In terms of smaller surveys, they can take the form of financial diaries, as in the case of the survey conducted for the paper by Vaishnavi Pratap and Rachit Khaitan, When is Microcredit Unsuitable?, which helps look at households availing loans despite not having the capacity to do so. Research is also conducted using the administrative data sets of specific financial institutions and the regulators. And one example of this is the Dwara KGFS administrative data set that we at Dwara Research combine with the CRIF Highmark Bureau data before sharing with interested researchers. So as mentioned previously, there are many administrators and as a result, many administrative data sets available, but they still hold a largely untapped source of information regarding low-income households and their activities. Deeper dives in specific regions using financial diaries can also provide a high level of knowledge to researchers understanding the functionings of households. Added to this, it is imperative that more data sets are available across time. The Household Finance Committee, instituted by the RBI, in particular draws attention to the 10-year cycle of the All India Debt and Investment Survey, or the AIDIS, conducted by NSSO, which forms the backbone for much debt and investment research and setting of baselines in India. And it recommends that it be conducted more frequently to ensure that there is a relevant nationwide source of data at almost all times. Moving on, we look at the second of these themes. So the second of these themes through which we categorize household finance research is the why theme. The what and the who help to give us an idea of all that a household does in concert with the financial system. But the why is essential in understanding how the interactions and various other stimuli affect its decision making. In a sense, this theme looks at what drives the various financial decisions of the household. So while analysis of evidence obtained from the previous theme can help establish relationships between behaviors and stimuli, they cannot in any way confirm that they are truly causal. So the why theme attempts or helps to bridge that understanding and allows researchers to know exactly why a certain decision was reached. This further helps in examining deviations from normative theories and in developing economic theory centered around developing economies. The research methodologies used to collect evidence on this theme are usually extremely focused and in-depth and utilize methods that closely observe and capture causal linkages. The randomized controlled trial has made attempts at collecting this evidence, but has encountered difficulties in scaling these understandings across contexts. There have also been efforts such as augmented RCTs that attempt to solve this issue by trying to ensure that results are more extrapolatable. But work over the last decade on understanding the social side of formal and informal credit has made ample use of other methods, such as those commonly found in anthropology. And these have helped to establish that repayment difficulties and household over-indebtedness run a lot deeper than just a number value on a spreadsheet. To take us into the state of household finance in India, Monami Dasgupta will continue from here.
Thank you, Vishwanath. So moving forward, good evening, everyone, once again. So Vishwanath has spoken about the features, themes, and the need for household finance research in India. I will be discussing the state of household finance research in India, as well as the demand and supply side factors that affect decision-making at a household level. So what we really do at this chapter is review the current state of household finance research in India by synthesizing evidence on market participation and portfolio allocation of Indian households across different types of assets and liabilities. We also discuss the factors that influence household decision making. What I mean is financial decision making. The evidence facilitate the design and the delivery of products and services that could be suitable for Indian households. Now, from the RBI Household Finance Committee report that was published in 2017, we know that Indian households allocate a massive proportion of their wealth in physical assets and relatively much lesser in financial assets. So for instance, at a national level, for an average household, 84% of their wealth is allocated towards physical assets. At a national level, we also know that they hold high proportion of unsecured debt, both for consumption as well as productive purposes. In case of portfolios of Indian households, we've observed that participation and allocation deviates a lot from the ones prescribed by the normative theories. That is, we see there's a considerable difference between the normative and the empirical household finance studies in the Indian context. These deviations occur because most probably the theoretical models fail to capture the behavioral, the regional, and the institutional context within which the households operate. Right. So moving on, let's discuss some of the factors that influence household decision making. Now, we have divided the factors in terms of demand and supply side factors. Under the demand side factors, we have the demographic and the behavioral factors. And under the supply side factors, we discuss three things. One is the uneven penetration of formal financial services across Indian states. Second are market limitations. And third are regulatory gaps. Sorry, there's a slight lag in my changing slides. Just 1 minute. Right. Oh, sorry. Right. So moving ahead, let's discuss some of the factors that affect the financial decision making at a household level. Starting with demand side factors, some of the demographic factors that affect participation are age, gender, education, etc. For instance, we understand that there are significant gender differences in ownership of bank accounts according to the Global Findex survey. Talking about behavioral factors, in behavioral factors, we find that cognitive limitation, time preference, lack of self-control, and psychological bias play a big role in explaining consumer choice. Some of these risk preference and trust deficiencies are reflected in low participation in insurance market, high dependency on informal debt market, and generally low participation across financial market as well as financial decision making at the household level. Right. Speaking about supply side factors, in India, we see that there is a substantial variation across the balance sheet of average Indian households. For instance, northern states like UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh have more than 80% allocation in real estate. On the other hand, southern states have a significantly high allocation in gold. Unsecured debt is high in many northern and southern states, but very low in northeastern states. These variation can be attributed to uneven financial depth in the country and regional variation in availability as well as access of financial services and financial products. So some of the market related factors that affect the financial decision making at a household level are high transaction cost. What we mean by high transaction cost is the cost of accessing and using banking services in low access environment due to challenges like proximity to last mile banking service. We also know that there's a high opportunity cost when it comes to low income households trying to avail banking services, and this opportunity cost can manifest itself with the wage that can be lost to open a bank account or to avail any banking services. Thirdly, psychological cost. The psychological cost refers to inability to comprehend and navigate through formal financial system due to language barriers, sense of intimidation, lack of agency, and many more other factors. There are also other market side limitations that we cover in the paper that are over-indebtedness, inadequate risk protection, low presence of customized savings. This is a particularly important point because there is a very huge lack of customized savings and investment product in India, particularly for households with volatile and uncertain cash flows. We also see that there is inadequate financial advice in the Indian financial system as of now. What we mean is there's lack of comprehensive source of a single source of financial advice, and a lot of times the advice is aligned to the manufacturer's sales objectives. And what we really want to get is a comprehensive financial advice for the low-income households at large. Right. Moving on, we also discuss some of the regulatory gaps in the paper that are directly or indirectly, that can affect directly or indirectly the financial decisions of the household. For instance, we know that there are non-uniform regulations across service providers, especially those service providers that cater to the low-income households. There is also a lack of adequate customer protection that can lead to mistake and over problems. Can I ask Misha to discuss the next few slides?
Yeah, thank you so much, Monami and Vishwanath. Hello, everyone. Misha here. So my colleagues have given a good context of, what is it in terms of the research methods that are typically used in household finance research. And Monami has spoken at length about the current state of household finance in India. So, in describing the current state, we take a slightly different approach, which is rely less on the macro level stylized facts. Obviously, we speak about that in the first few slides, but then talk more about why is the state of household finance in India the way it is right now. And Monami has spoken extensively about various factors that influence household financial decision making. And you can see from those factors that clearly households are making suboptimal decisions and choices. And obviously, the reasons for that depend on the several constraints that they have, both on the demand supply side as well as on the institutional level. It's well acknowledged that they are facing several constraints, but there's no denying the fact that there's a serious need for innovation in the financial service sector for low-income households. And if I have to just present a case for it, we would sort of categorize that into 5 or 6 broad buckets. So to start with, in the paper we say that we all know from the Global Findex that access to bank accounts has increased, but this has not necessarily translated into adequate usage. Then there are significant design issues in terms of the various products and services available to low-income households. We also know that there are challenges with the delivery of services to the last mile beneficiaries. Regulatory gap is something that comes often in light when we think about financial services for low-income households. And all of this leads to low penetration. All of this leads to an over-reliance on short-term credit to manage risk. And obviously this is largely to do with low penetration of non-credit products as well. But it's quite clear that there's a strong case for innovation that the sector needs in terms of different product designs that can be improved, in terms of the different channels that can be looked at for better delivery of services, as well as innovation at the regulatory level. So just moving now and talking about specifically about innovation. So in this paper, how we classify innovation is we categorize into three broad buckets: product innovation, process innovation, and regulatory innovation. So actually, I'll just spend a little bit time talking about what I mean by each of these. So product innovation refers to the improvement in the design or features of a financial product that matches the complex financial requirements and dynamic life cycle issues of low-income households. Process innovation, on the other hand, refers to innovation in the process of provision of financial services, or innovation in distribution channel or mechanism through which the financial service is provided to the end beneficiary. And regulatory innovation is innovation across regulatory guidelines and provisions of infrastructure, both along the lines of hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure, to build a more enabling and conducive environment for the expansion of financial services industry, especially for low-income households. So I think it's fair to say that innovation across this spectrum can help address, the classic challenges that we see that the sector faces in terms of gaining access to new market segments, creating new offerings for existing customers, deepening customer engagement and product usage, as well as enabling better data collection, use, and management. So now I'll just spend a little bit time actually describing what, describing the different, describing the different sort of facets of innovation that we refer to in the paper across each of these broad three buckets. Just quickly moving to the next slide. So when we talk about product innovation, I think in the paper we start by making a case that really design of the product has a huge role to play in influencing consumer or household choices. And designing a product that suits the needs, capacities, preferences of low-income households is extremely essential when we talk about uptake and adoption of financial products and services. So what are the features within this, or rather what are the facets within this bucket that we think of and that we want to spread the word on among financial service providers and regulators when it comes to improvements in the design of the product? So just to elaborate on that, firstly, we would say that, innovation around products that are missing from the market for low-income households is something that is essential. So here, before I talk about what are some of the products that are missing, I just want to start by saying that obviously we've seen fintech industry coming with a range of products and services in the sector. So for example, KaleidoFin uses a savings-led approach in helping its customers meet their life cycle goals through the provision of tailored investment advice and products. Similarly, we have another fintech, well-known fintech called Toffee Insurance, which is an insurtech that provides insurance to cover risks associated with everyday aspects of life. So, I mean, we know that there are quite a few fintechs in this domain that actually reach out to low-income households with customized solution. But here we're just sort of drawing a case to say that there's significant scope to innovate around products that are missing. And so what are those products? So just for example, example, small ticket loan sizes, say less than 5,000 rupees or below, flexible savings and investment platform for low income households with non-equal installment contribution. Similarly, products that are required by rural agri households, such as cattle insurance, rainfall insurance. These products exist, but they don't exist at scale. And there are also significant design constraints with these products that make the product less attractive to the end user. So that's one. Second aspect of improvement in product design is bundling of products. Now here, essentially, what bundling does is that it allows financial service providers to combine an optimal set of products based on expertise of the financial service provider and based on assessing what are the requirements of low-income households, and provides that bundle of product to the customer. What bundling does is that it allows the financial service providers to reduce transaction cost and offer a comprehensive set of products to the end user. And but of course, when we think about bundling, it is important to raise the question of whether bundling protects consumers' interests or whether that of financial service providers. So here I just want to sort of draw on an example. So one of the common ways in which low-income households access insurance is through bundling of credit and life insurance cover sold to them by lenders such as NBFC, MFIs, and so on. And here we see that the insurance product can be relatively easily bundled with credit, and the premiums can be collected with loan repayments. So therefore it reduces the transaction cost. However, the structure of the product is such that it requires the customer to pay the premium, even though the insurance coverage amount goes to the lender and not the nominee in the event of the death of the borrower. So if you think about it, it's protecting the seller's interest, and not so much, the focus is not so much on providing the customer with a adequate coverage life insurance product. In fact, a study by Esther Duflo and Banerjee and Hornbeck in 2014 found that the impact of bundling health insurance with microfinance credit found that the requirement to purchase health insurance substantially reduced microcredit clients' loan renewal rates, meaning that people were willing to give up, or more willing to give up credit to avoid buying insurance. And so it's important to think about, okay, you bundle the product based on whatever suits the customer and to reduce the transaction cost, but what is it in terms of outcome that the customer is getting? Moving on, we talk about product design based on customer's profile. I mean, this is definitely important, because when you think about design, it's important to incorporate behavioral biases and preferences of customers. So therefore, when the financial service providers think of designing a product, especially for low-income households, factors such as their demographics, their unique financial capacities, constraints, risk appetite, psychometric profile in terms of their attitude, behavior, preferences, and bias is something that they need to definitely consider. And finally, in terms of design, the fourth point is flexibility in product design to accommodate unsteady and varied preference for low-income households. So here we have some amount of research in the space of microfinance that shows that flexibility in microfinance loan contracts can be in the form of flexible timing, flexible installment, moratorium, etc., can actually improve the well-being of households. So these are some of the aspects that we think of and articulate in the paper when we talk about product innovation. And this is not to say that this is not already happening. It is happening, by different fintechs, by different traditional service providers, by different MFIs, small finance banks, but there's a lot more scope for outreach and scale that the sector has to sort of think of. Okay, so moving on to talking about process innovation. And like I said, process innovation has to do with the provision of financial services. So when we talk about process, we can't help but talk about technology for sure, because the use of technology in the provision has definitely high potential in terms of reducing the transaction cost, increasing geographical accessibility, and thereby deepening access to formal financial services among the previously excluded and underserved households. And obviously, in the Indian context, we know that technology has a key role to play, and we often hear about digital financial services, digital inclusion, and rightly so, given the sort of spread of digital financial services, the outreach, and the scale with which people have sort of accepted and adopted these kinds of services. But it is important to keep in mind the current context in which digital financial services are being offered. And why we say this is because we know that a typical Indian household, so we know from large scale representative data sets that a typical Indian household can be characterized as a low income household residing in rural area, earning below rupees 10,000 a month, and they typically have lower ownership to smartphones and lower levels of digital literacy. And so obviously, when you talk a lot about digital financial services, that's great, but then you also have to think about the current context of consumer capabilities. And this then leads us to the second channel of process innovation, which is the phygital distribution channel, if I may say, which is a combination of physical or human touch that agents and agent networks provide, as well as the digital channel. And now, obviously, this is not new. Business correspondents have been have been providing financial services to low-income households, hard-to-reach clients right from 2006. But unfortunately, there are significant challenges that remain in the delivery of financial services through business correspondence. So, infrastructural challenges, operational, financial challenges, and questions of viability often come when we talk about business correspondence and delivery of services through them. So really, when we talk about agent and agent network, some of the questions that we've posed in the paper, and we don't claim to have found answers to it for sure, but something that the financial service providers, regulators need to think of are as follows. So what are really the services that agents should provide? Should it just be restricted to cash in, cash out, or should it be a larger set of services? Also, how can agents' incentive structure be managed such that they work in consumers' best interest? So there's significant research to say that there's misalignment of incentive between the customer and the agent. Also, what should the agent's role be in providing financial advice to low-income households? Currently, research is not conclusive on this. So in a low-access environment where financial products and services are not available at one common point, could a centralized avenue for financial advice by agents be valuable and something worth thinking about? And finally, what about agents' skills, capabilities, and how do we ensure reliable and accurate delivery of their services? So those are some of the open questions we pose in our paper when we talk about the agent network. Finally, talking about regulatory innovation, and obviously this is a topic very close to our heart at Dwara, and we've done a lot of research in this area. But we just want to sort of start by saying and using Campbell's paper from 2016, household finance is the focus of regulatory attention because individuals have to make complex financial decisions with bigger consequences, and as well the consequences are not right now. You might see the consequences 10 years down the line. So, it's not always easy for an individual to understand what will happen if I make this decision today. Consumer capability and literacy is often low in developing countries. So that's something we need to think about in India and other emerging markets. Technology is increasingly playing a key role in development of sophisticated products, and households might have behavioral preferences and biases that may lead them to make suboptimal decisions. They may make investment mistakes. They may fall prey to, over borrowing. So there are a lot of customer protection concerns that really come about when we think about how the current financial system is operates, and therefore the need for regulation in the sector. So really in our paper, we're saying we're drawing a lot from previous research, we're drawing a lot from sector experts and their voices to say that a conducive regulatory environment is very important to protect both customers' interest, as well as promoting competition and innovation. And really, when we talk about this in the paper, we divide it into two big buckets. We talk about hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. Hard infrastructure includes the development of digital infrastructure systems and utilities, such as payments and settlement systems, regulatory sandbox. So here really what we're saying is that what are some of the innovations that have happened in this space? So we know, for example, the unified payment interface that allowed for transfer of funds in real time from any bank account and which was interoperable really led to a lot of growth in the digital payment industry. And now in these times, we've seen how important cash transfers, how digital cash transfers are important and can be done literally at the click of a button to millions and millions of households. Soft infrastructure, on the other hand, talks about regulations, standard, or programs that guide the provision of financial services and mitigate risk. So here, what we say in the paper is really it's all about what are the guidelines that the regulators issue for financial services industry. And we make two key points. One is to say that there's probably a need for the regulators to move away from prescriptive approach, because it really requires the financial service providers to stick to the script and leaving little room for creativity and innovation. And we observe that regulations pertaining to financial service providers catering to low-income households are prescribed a very strict set of rules. So what are the examples here? Examples would be from the microfinance sector, where RBI recently increased the indebtedness limit of NBFC MFI borrower to from 1 lakh to 1.25 lakh, which is the annual income of 1.25 lakh. Now, some might say, what is the need for this? Perhaps, RBI is trying to curb overlending. Perhaps RBI is trying to restrict this product to just low-income households. But nevertheless, it begs the question as to what is the need for being too prescriptive in its approach. There are also examples of these from the priority sector lending norms, which has a limit of or a requirement of 40% lending to priority sector. There's also example of this in the microinsurance product. So we have quite a few examples here, and we just draw a case for maybe moving slightly away from that approach. And secondly, we draw from a lot of significant research done by Dwara on suitability and suitability guidelines. So what suitability really requires is that it ensures the onus of selling suitable products that are suitable to match customers' needs, financial capacity, risk capacity, appetite, lies squarely on the financial service provider and not the customer. And we also say that uniform conduct obligations, again drawing from some of our previous research at Dwara, should be applied uniformly across all regulated entities and should be adopted in order to prevent low-income households from entering into contracts that are definitely globally unsuitable products, or that are definitely unsuitable to them. And we look at this from the perspective of products that are unsuitable for clients below a certain income threshold, or who are above or below a certain age. So those are some of the key points that we draw on from previous research and from sector experts and opinions in the sector. And really what we're trying to say in the paper and in this section is supporting innovation across these parameters can help regulators actually meet their twin objective of promoting both competition as well as protecting customers' interest. So yeah, with that, we actually wrap up our presentation. So just to give a quick recap, we started by talking about what are the facets of low-income households. Then we moved on to talking about how is research in the area of household finance structured, what should we think about, what are the methodologies, what is the current state of the sector, especially household finance, and then where are the priorities for innovation. So I hope this gave you a very good flavor of our position and our perspective and our work on this paper. The paper is obviously available online, and I'm sure all of you can easily access the link to that. So yeah, so hope this gives you some good motivation to also go and read the paper if you haven't already done so. So we'll now open it up for questions and answers that have come in from different people here. And I'll just need a minute to really see what the comments are, because I haven't had a chance to look at it. So maybe I'll just go one by one. Actually, I see somebody has raised the hand, so maybe I'll give that person a chance to actually speak. So actually, I'm not sure, Kamesh, can attendees actually as well talk, or is it just over the chat? Sorry, I should have known that before.
Attendees can actually talk, so I can enable
So we
them.
have Sharafuddin Irshad who has raised his hand, and I'm not sure if he's typed in his question. So
It would be great if you could just ask them to type the question rather than asking, maybe.
to type the question? Okay, sure. Okay, got it. Okay, then please, Sharafuddin, if you have already done so, sorry. I'll just go over question by question. So here we see in comments, somebody saying that quite relevant. Have you considered gender aspect in your study, as behavioral biases affect up to large extent financial decisions, and biases also differ between male and female? Yeah, so I think that's something that we have spoke about in the second section on themes. Vishwanath, you probably just want to add a word or two on looking at the themes by gender and behavior.
Sorry, Misha, could you give me control back? I'm unable to look at the questions.
Yeah, no. So Dr. Amit Sinha has commented saying that this is very interesting. Have you considered gender aspect in your study? Behavioral biases affect large extent financial decisions, and biases also differ between male and female. So I was just wondering if you want to maybe say a word or two from the themes that you spoke about and the gender lens.
Yes, sir. Definitely, the gender is definitely an important lens through which to look at a lot of the questions we're asking. However, we feel that that falls under the household motivations, which is the why theme that we mentioned. And we feel like it's easier to bucket into two large themes this way, within which, of course, there will be sub-themes and different lenses through which we can look at things. But yes, you are definitely right. It is an important aspect in controlling or contributing to household behavior.
Okay, thanks, Vishwanath. So again, I think Monam has actually also answered that. Okay, just moving on. It will help if the questions are posted to all in chat. Okay. How important is the inclusion of client protection principles for process innovation, given financial providers often cross-sell the product to the poorly informed borrowers? Right. Of course. So I'm unable to see your name. So yeah, definitely, Shahid. Yes, Shahid, definitely important question, and something that we think about very deeply. In fact, so customer protection is something, in fact, that we have a Dwara research position paper on, and we can think of it in process innovation as well. I see your point that it's not just from a regulatory perspective, but also while the financial service providers are providing the different products and services, at that time, what are some of the customer protection concerns that really play out? And how should that be structured? How should that be regulated and governed? And yeah, definitely fair point that, you know, it's obviously poorly informed borrowers or low-income household borrowers are more likely to suffer on this account, given that they have little or relatively little exposure compared to other income groups. So yeah, your point is well taken. I think in the paper we put it in regulatory because we're trying to say that from a regulatory perspective, regulators have to really think deeply about this, and they have so in terms of issuing suitability guidelines, and SEBI, IRDA, PFRD have issued suitability guidelines. But obviously, no doubt that more needs to be done, especially along the lines of information disclosure, as well as thinking and implementing, adopting suitability for sure. Okay. So I'm just moving on, scrolling down. Vishwanath and Monami, please feel free to interject whenever. Given that microfinance loans are fungible and often underutilized. Okay, I see Monami, you've already answered a bunch of questions. So I'm sorry I'm late to the party because...
No, so some of the questions that, since you were giving the presentation, some of the questions are on the in the chat box, and I thought I could just provide the suitable link to it. So yes, we do understand that money is fungible, and so are loans. But we do not have complete bias towards not giving loans for consumption purposes. Yes, there's that sometimes does lead to situations like over-indebtedness. So there is a very thin line between understanding when to give consumption loans at a point where the household is is in a position to repay it back without harming themselves in any way, materially or by pulling out human capital. And we have engaged into that question very deeply, as you will find the link that I've provided below.
Right. Thanks, Monami. So I see another question here, which is there an evidence in the literature to suggest that by advancing health loans to microfinance customers, this helps in better serving these loans to the low and middle income households? So, sorry, sir, I'm not sure what you mean by better serving these loans. There is definitely a lot of evidence on the impact of access and use of microfinance, but particularly on health loans per se, I'm not sure. That is something that we have not explored in this systematic review of the state of household finance.
Yeah, and adding to Misha's point, sometimes the reports that microfinance institutions and NBFC put out, we do understand what is a consumption loan versus what is a productive loan, but the breakdown beyond that is the actual purpose for which the loan was used is sometimes not reported. So if it's a normal JLG loan being used for health purposes, that is something we are left unaware of just because the reporting is not done that way. But yes, we will take this question and look further if we can find some evidence on that.
Right. Thanks, Monami. Angan, I see your question on have we addressed the information asymmetry in terms of knowledge and awareness of finance mechanism? Yes, definitely. We speak about this in the paper. We speak about this specifically in the section where we talk about financial advice and the need for financial advice for low-income households, given the asymmetrical information between service providers and the end customers. And we make a case that it is therefore, very important for low-income households to have access to affordable financial services, affordable financial advice, as well as, we also think about what are some of the implications of financial advice being provided at the point of sale versus, just as advice separately. And we say that integrating advice at the point of sale is much better. And again, we go back to our position, which is to say that the onus of the advice and the implications coming out of that advice squarely fall on low income households. So thank you for that question. Shafiruddin, you have a question on, just not able to scroll there. In my research all over India, but mainly not, majority of borrowers have rarely accounted loan repayment as part of their data on household expenses. Do you have a response to it? Why? Just to elaborate, for example, wash loans are often sold as part of health loans. Right. Thanks. I think Monami has already answered that question. But yeah, adding just my perspective to it, actually, we do see quite a lot of research. In fact, just the research that Vishwanath spoke about, which is the financial diaries that we did in Krishnagiri, for over a year. In that research, we actually saw that a significant proportion of households took up loans to repay older loans. So, the churning of finance or repayment of previous loans is something that has come repeatedly in the literature. In a lot of the studies we've done in the South, for sure. We've also done we've also looked at quite a few nationally representative samples like the CMI data set, the NSSO data, the NSSO doesn't have purpose, but definitely in the CMI and other data sets, it does come across as, repayment of previous loans being one of the purposes. Yes, Professor Sachit Rao, nice to see your questions. The Krishnagiri Diaries is available online. Yes, I see Vishwanath has replied. That's great.
Misha, there's a question by Sharafuddin, I think it's above Shahid Parvez, which says, how do we design an innovative product in the current banking regulation system? And how can we include vulnerable communities in this process? If you can take that.
Yeah, Monami, could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, so it's just above Shahid Parvez's question. It says, how do we design an innovative product in the current banking regulation system? And how can we include vulnerable communities in this process?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So we talk about this at length in the section on product innovation. And I would really go back to some of the points that I make, on designing a product based on the customer profile, the demographics, their behavioral preferences. And while thinking about design of product, look at what flexibility features can be introduced, given that low-income households are unique in terms of their profile, in terms of the cash flows, which are volatile, the occupation that they're involved in, which is informal, casual, daily wage laborers, earners largely, and so of course largely based in rural areas. So also thinking about how can the reach of the product be scaled up and really reach the last mile consumer. So all of those facets are something that we think about in product design. Given the current situation, this paper is actually written in that current context. We draw up a case to say that there are quite a few products that are missing from the market. So what are those missing products? Financial service providers should really get into the psyche of low-income households and think about really design a strategy, a business model for products and services that are suitable for low-income households. We know from a very recent research that Dwara Research has done that commercial banks and a lot of other really large financial entities simply don't have any business strategy in place for low-income segment when it comes to product design and development. So I would say definitely start from the top in terms of designing a strategy, then come to think about product development, understand the customer better, and then think of the design. That would be my answer to that.
Yeah, Misha, if you don't mind, I'd like to take some of the questions that are in the question.
Yeah, please, Vishwanath, go for it.
Shahid, sir, just to answer, so I'm assuming everybody can see the question and answers, but Shahid, sir, talked about the importance for other tools to perhaps examine and do impact evaluations, and has suggested the qualitative impact assessment QIP method developed at the University of Bath. Unfortunately, I'm not too familiar on it. It's something I'll take a look at, and maybe we could perhaps interface offline about it. With regards to RCT no longer being reliable and practical, I think oversells or rather undersells the usefulness of the randomization method in providing good quality results that can be actionable later on. Admittedly, it is a very context-based system, and therefore results need to be treated carefully. To answer your second question, no, Dwara, I believe, apart from our Krishnagiri diaries, which as mentioned are available on the website, both the data as well as the surveys, as of now, we are not running anything within the Household Finance Research Initiative. Perhaps Monami or Misha, you could address the third question. In terms of regulatory gaps, what is the status of research on social performance management vis-a-vis household finance?
Actually, we haven't. I mean, actually, we'll also have to look up what the social performance management was in respect to household finance mean. So, short answer is we haven't looked at that metric, but we'll look into it after this chat.
Okay, so moving on. I think Shahid sir's next question was answered in the group chat. Avnish, so to answer your first question, what are the data points of credit bureaus being used by Dwara in household finance? These are the standard points of information collected or reported by institutions to the credit bureau. So these involve basic loan information. So what is the loan? What is the type of the loan? What is the tenure of the loan? Who's the institution that provided the loan? Loan amounts, loan sanctioned amounts, and finally we have 3 years worth of reporting data on each of the loans. Yeah. Misha, please go ahead with the next question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Vishwanath. So actually, Avnish's next question is, did you observe any significant difference in household finance and second cycle, third cycle customer set in MFI business? This is something that we haven't explored in the paper per se. But yes, we do have access to a large customer data set from KGFS. In which all the customer details and transaction data points get recorded. So it's something that we've been exploring, like, just analyzing the KGFS data set from a different lens, but something that we haven't touched upon in this paper. Yes, and Shahid, on your question about link to Krishnagiri diaries, yes, for sure. I think we can just, there's a lot of interest in Krishnagiri diaries, so we'll probably just request our colleague Kamesh to just forward it perhaps to all the registered participants, if that works. Yeah, Monami and Vishwanath, am I missing anything else or any other points that you'd like to add?
I believe we've covered everything.
Misha, just to elaborate on Vinay's question on, and I see you already answered it, but I would like to take a second shot at it, which says that can you please throw some light on government schemes like Jan Dhan and PDS from a usage consumer acceptance standpoint? As Misha says, we haven't spoken much about expenditures. So PDS comes under the umbrella of expenditure. We haven't spoken much about that. So what we really end up covering in the paper is your financial assets, liabilities and financial portfolios of the Indian houses that we're looking at. And with respect to Jan Dhan and banking accounts, we've also looked at the metrics put out by Findex, which says about what is the ultimate participation of using the bank accounts and opening bank accounts by different age groups of Indian households divided by gender and urban rural. But at this point, I would like to kind of redirect your question to another practice that we have under Dwara Research, which is the Social Protection Initiative, which actually looks very, very closely into this entire, gamut of knowledge and understanding of, social protection initiatives for Indian households and particularly for low-income households.
Yeah, that's great, Monami. Thanks for actually bringing that up. That's really good. Okay, so I think that covers everything. We are very well on time. Very, very well on time. All the participants have covered their questions, and we've also sort of given a good overview, I hope, of the research that we've done. And we sincerely hope that all of you can read the paper, and the paper is up on Dwara Research website. So thank you so much for all your questions, all your feedback. Definitely we'll take it into account. We're also really happy that all of you could make for this session and really actively engage and participate. So thank you so much, and definitely thank you to Kamesh, Vishwanath and Monami. we'll now close the conversation and have a good night. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Please have a good night and do stay safe.